Market failure. In this presentation, we will be covering what is the context of the market failure, what has caused the market failure, a graph illustrating the economic ramifications of the market failure, a discussion of the graph and a clear application to the market failure in question, what is the impact of the particular market failure on the community, what actions have been taken to correct the market failure by the government and by the community, and to what extent have these measures been successful. This presentation looks at sugar production in Awash, Ethiopia, and the context of this market failure is that a large portion of this fertile land in Awash is used for sugar growing and production by big commercial producers, because a lot of the rest of the country is either highlands or desert. However, with the production, local villages are often relocated without compensation or jobs. Employment is not supplied to local villagers because they are seen as low-skilled workers. Local villagers do not consume sugar, so therefore there are a third party in the transaction between consumers and producers, making this a negative externality. The negative externality specifically is that local villages have less land to hunt, graze, settle, and they are not employed by local producers. Now, what has caused the market failure? In Ethiopia, there's not a lot of land suitable for farming, therefore, Awash has created a high demand for it. Fertile land allows for agriculture in southeastern Ethiopia, making it a prime place for sugar production. This creates, and now the small amount of land for farming creates a high demand for land. So commercial producers use that land to produce goods without taking into account local communities that might be affected by this. This is both because of financial restrictions and out of disregard for the people. Either way, this leads to a third party negatively affected, and so the negative externality is present, and market failure will be evident in the sugar market, because the negative externality has shifted the marginal social cost higher than the marginal private cost, and the market is not in a state of allocative efficiency. Here's a graph illustrating the economic ramifications of the market failure. The positive line all the way to the left represents the marginal social cost, or the supply line plus the externality. The positive line all the way to the right represents the marginal private cost, or the producer supply line. The marginal private cost is plus the tax is in the middle of those two lines, representing the government's attempt to restore allocative efficiency and shift the MPC upwards to the MSC. In this, however, there's a loss of efficiency seen in the shaded triangle, or welfare loss. This represents the lack of allocative efficiency in the market. With the tax, the new equilibrium price will now become $1.25 per kilogram of sugar, while the old one was only $1 per kilogram of sugar. Sugar is relatively inelastic because it is a primary commodity and there are not many substitutes other than the low supplied honey. So the majority of the tax gets placed on the consumers. The quantity, which I was not able to find out, the quantity which I was trying to figure out decreases because less people will be willing to buy the product at the new heightened price. Although market equilibrium is restored between the marginal private cost in the tax and the marginal private cost and the demand line, there is still an externality as relocation of villages is still occurring. It is inevitable with the growth of the market. This leads to the market failure continuing, and allocative efficiency is not fully restored in the market. Now, a discussion of the graph and a clear application to the market failure in question. The sugar was originally being sold at a price of $1 and supplied at an unknown supply of Q1, quantity number 1. The negative externality of land loss and unemployment leads to the marginal social cost being higher than the marginal private cost. In order to correct this, the marginal private cost line has to shift upwards, so although the producers could lower production and increase price, this would not fully do it. And so the government would have to tax the producer in order to move the marginal private cost up. In turn, less sugar is supplied, and the price is heightened to $1.25, 25 cents higher than before, per kilogram of sugar. This brings balance to the new market. However, there is still a slight externality as relocation is still happening with the growth of the market, and so the market is not fully removed of failure. And the community loss or welfare loss is present in the shaded triangle, which represents the loss of land, the loss of efficiency, which in this case would be community surplus, and producer surplus with the tax. So the impact of this particular market failure on the community. Well, in Addis Ababa, human rights activists are unhappy with such arrangements. They are not happy with the villagers being removed off their land and having to ration resources that are around them. They're moved onto less fertile, more desertified land. The villagers are driven into unfertile land with little grazing grass, not compensated for the move. So this represents a negative externality. Villagers are also not given jobs at the factory as any form of recompensation because they're seen as unskilled, uneducated workers, which is also part of the externality. Producers can earn a lot of revenue through having good land to farm on, though they are taxed, which decreases the revenue as well. Government earns a lot of revenue through taxing the inelastic good, which leads to a 25% increase in the price for consumers. This tax also leads to the level of externality being lowered, and so the market is not in as much of a failure as before, but it's still in failure. So the actions taken by the government to correct this market failure, it's imposed a tax on the company, which has led to a 25% increase in price for consumers, because it's an essential good and won't lose a lot of demand. It's very inelastic. This leads to the marginal private cost line shifting upwards to the marginal social cost line, but not fully. Although the government has taken actions against it, it has decreased the externality cost. However, it is still not in allocative efficiency. With the community, not much action has been taken. Activists have pressured the producers to compensate local villages moved by the factories through jobs or money. This would lessen the negative externality and have the marginal private cost move closer to the marginal social cost, which helps restore equilibrium and allocative efficiency. Though it is not likely that this will fully restore allocative efficiency. The extent of which these measures have been successful. The government measure has proven to be more successful than the community measure, however, it's not perfectly successful. Taxing the good has raised the marginal private cost and has created the financial incentive for producers not to displace local villages without recompensating. Displacement is now seen on a smaller scale, so the MPC is much closer to the marginal social cost. though it is not fully successful as there is still some dead weight loss and villagers are still relocated. So the market is still in failure. It has not proved completely successful, however, has lessened the impact of the externalities. The producers have remained largely unresponsive to community calls as they do not have much influence or power. Uh, so the community response of advocating for recompensation has proven very unsuccessful, and the only real level of success has been in the form of government taxation. However, despite this, the market is still not in full allocative efficiency, so the market failure still exists. All of my sources were from personal interviews, and the photos were taken by me on September 2015 school trip to Awash, Ethiopia.